Before you start with Acro Mode on your Avata 2, I have 3 tips for you definitely want to use. We all want to get flying with cool acro modes, but mostly just don't know where to begin, don't we? With these few steps, I promise you a very good start in the world of manual drone flying. In this video we will talk about how your controller helps you with manual mode, how DJI helps you getting into manual mode, and lastly how you can keep the fun going and enter full manual mode. So let's talk about manual mode. What is manual mode actually? If you imagine an airplane, there are 3 axes how it gets steered. You have the yaw axis, which allows the plane, or in this case our drone, to turn its nose left or right. Next, you have the pitch axis, which allows your plane, or the drone, to turn its nose up or down. And lastly, you have the roll axis, which is pretty self-explanatory because it enables the plane to roll. And later I will tell you why this is important to remember. Next, you have to understand what manual mode on a drone means. If you are flying a drone in normal or sports mode, it has its sensors and GPS activated. Their job is to hold the drone flat and upright in the air, which is pretty good for cinematic shots, but not really what you are aiming for in an FPV drone because it's more of an action-oriented filming experience. So if you turn on manual mode, it means that the drone does not support you with GPS or its sensors. You have to steer and accelerate on your own. Which brings me to my first tip. You need to make some changes to your controller. There are 3 stick modes you can choose from in the goggles controller menu, which impact not only the axis, but also where your throttle is. In mode 1 and mode 3, the throttle is on the right stick, but there are differences in the axis configuration, which you can look up in the menu. In mode 2, the mode that is enabled by default, and the throttle is on the left. Your throttle for manual mode will always be on the stick positions where you normally ascend and descend your drone. So after checking which mode you have selected, you can open the backside of your controller with a flat screwdriver and you will find 2 screws. Here you should tighten the screw on the right to disable the bounce back function of the throttle stick. This is really important because you don't want to have your controller work against you while flying. In manual mode, you will have to oppose gravity with your throttle settings. Here it is very helpful that if you found the right position on your throttle sticks, it stays that way and you don't have to control it manually all the time. If you don't want to change your controller every flight in the 2 default modes, which are normal and sports mode, I would recommend you to practice flying with this changed setting in these modes first. With that, you will get used to the movable stick very quickly. You have to be able to centralize the stick even with your goggles on, so you better get a feel for it. For my next tip, which also contains a bonus tip, we will be configuring the buttons on the controller. First, you have to put on your goggles, and there you have to navigate to the controller configuration, which can be selected by the 5D button on the upper right side of your goggles. If you found the controller settings, you can change the configuration for the flight mode button on your controller. By default, sports mode is selected instead of manual mode. You have to change that button configuration. If you change the setting to manual mode, it will ask you if you did the stick thing that we did in the first place, and now you have to remember why we did this. But after configuring this, you can select manual mode while flying, but DJI still got the training wheels on you. More on that later. Now that you are flying on your own with your modified controller, maybe you should just try to adjust the new controls in normal or sports mode, as I said before. Then, if you do the first steps in manual mode with the training wheels on, and you should do panic, for example because you tried to adjust the gimbal right after switching to manual mode like I did, and risk crashing your drone because you forgot that your drone is still flying at full speed because of the locked throttle stick, you will discover the best feature of them all. The glorious pause button on your controller. In my journey to get some FPV experience, I have grown very fond of it, and I think personally it's one of the best features for beginners. It's there for you in every situation. If you're losing control over your height, just press pause. Turning the drone upside down, just press pause. Nearly crashing into something, just press pause. Somebody approaching you and you feel the need to talk to him, probably should just press pause and your drone will level out in the air and just stay that way and switch to normal mode. Which brings me to my promised bonus tip. In the beginning I thought that flying close to the ground would help me not to damage my drone because it wouldn't fall that right out from the air, but boy was I wrong. Every time I switched to manual mode, it just fell straight out of the air and crashed its nose into the grass. That's when I realized if you fly higher, you just have more time to get some control over your drone. And maybe if you do panic, just press the pause button so that your drone has the chance to level out and it won't crash. So the tip is just the higher the better. My third tip for keeping the fun going, you also can practice the whole stuff with an FPV simulator. I personally used Uncrash with the DJI remote controller to get some basic understanding of flying, where you can simulate your drone with a couple of setting changes. I personally had about 10 hours of simulator training to feel very comfortable with the real drone. Now you should be ready to fly in manual mode with the real drone and also get rid of the training wheels. DJI implemented a manual mode with restricted rate limits enabled by default. That means even if you keep your sticks turned all the way to the left or right and expect your drone to flip over, it won't do it. You have to go back to the controller and turn off the feature. Now you can start to try your first rolls and flips. I would recommend you to look for a big open space and fly as high as you are allowed in your country. That way you can use the pause button while your drone is in free fall, or if something goes wrong, you have the time to get control over your drone. That's it for this video. I hope you found my tips very helpful. Leave a like and comment if you did, or if you have some tips for improvement for me personally. These steps got me into the basics of manual mode very quickly, so that I can focus more on doing actual tricks with the manual mode instead of figuring out how it works in the first place.